today's topic. We're not actually going to learn new content because we finished the chapter. Woo! We finished chapter 2. All right, but we're going to look at one of the main questions. That is one of the last questions, the guiding questions from the chapter, and that was, how successful was Reconstruction? So one thing that does periodically come up onto these is measuring success. So how do we measure success whenever you're doing it for an ACE paper, that is? So there's a couple things you need to think about. Measuring success. You need to get a ruler out, and you're going to pull out the book, and you're going to measure how much we write about, or how much we learned about it in page numbers, and that's how we measure success. Thank you. That wasn't funny. I'm sorry. All right. So first we're going to look at time. Maybe I should draw my circles after I write the words. So what we need to think about time. Do that.
Oh.
All right.
Interesting.
Let's look at time. So, for measuring success, you need to think about how, over what period of time. Are we looking at short term, medium term, or long term? Because that differs. Something can be really successful in the short term, but when you look at it over a long period of time, it actually kind of sucked. So, we measure it in short term. What looks like a good short term period of time?
Let's say a year.
A year. Let's go with a year. How about a medium term?
Say probably 5 to 15.
Let's go with 5.
When you're talking about long term, we've been around for quite a while.
Now, long term.
10 plus.
You want for me to be crazy? Let's go 25 years. So medium term would be like 5 years to 24 years. Or approximately. You don't need to go, this was 24 years ago. This is medium term. Nothing like that. So think about the time. So we're talking about Reconstruction. Was Reconstruction a success in the short term? 1 to 5 years time span.
Yes.
Yeah, it was kind of successful. Was it successful medium term?
No.
Not as much. Long term, was it success?
No.
Absolutely not. But then you also need to think of some other things. If we're talking about success in what? What type of success? What are some ways Reconstruction was successful? Some big broad topics.
Amendments.
Which would fall under? Amendments are part of what? Oh, was it constitutionally successful? How else?
Socially.
Yes.
Socially. Was it social success? Keep going.
Economic.
Economic. And I heard somebody say political too. Culturally. Now let's call it a day with that. So can you measure success constitutionally, socially, economically, politically, and culturally? Absolutely. And you can measure all those things in time spans, right? And how was it constitutionally successful in the short term? Yes, because you got the 13th Amendment. Was it constitutionally successful medium term? Yeah, because you got the 15th Amendment well after 5 years, so yes. Now, long term, was there tinkering with the Constitution?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just ignoring that it existed? Yeah. And then socially, we'll get to that for a second. Was it economically successful? Ooh, I don't know if you would ever say that it was really economically successful. It was really expensive. Though sharecropping, you could argue, did cause the bleeding to stop, so to speak, because cotton prices started going up. Food prices started going down, so that would be an economic victory. So, but it's really small. Now, for the other ones, we're going to hold that thought because what's another thing we need to think about it being a success? Effective, yeah. Well, that's kind of like the overall, like. It's one of the. It's really broad. Was Reconstruction without me? Who was it a success for?
Slaves?
So who? But that's what you have to do is you have to measure who.
Oh.
Because these things could be success for one group of people and not a success for other groups of people. So when we're looking at Reconstruction, we would talk about African Americans. No, that would be African Americans around the country. So that would be people who were already freed, living in northern states and in the South. Was Reconstruction successful for African Americans in general? Was it the beginning and then it kind of, if you lived in the North, was it successful for you? Yeah, I would say it worked out all okay for you for the most part if you were in the North. And so like segregation laws started becoming passed, which the North didn't really have a lot of segregation laws, but they segregated. Just wasn't by law. So that sense, partially maybe short term. Yeah, like yeah. You don't have to worry about going and becoming a slave and being captured and fugitive slave acted. Medium term, yeah, you get 14th to 15th Amendments. Yeah. Long term, maybe not.
A line under time.
Now, moving on, we got freedmen. Was Reconstruction a short-term success for freedmen?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. They're not slaves anymore. And the Freedmen's Bureau was started. Was it a medium-term success?
Started going down.
Partially. You had the 14th to 15th Amendments, but it started going down until it was just completely eliminated. And then long-term, was Reconstruction a success for African American or for freedmen? 100% not. Yeah, you're not a slave, but that's about all that can be said about it. So, who else might be people that would be impacted by Reconstruction?
White people.
What kind of white people?
Poor white people.
Poor white people. Was Reconstruction a success for them? Yeah.
I'd say it was a short term.
Because you can argue short term because they land.
They got jobs and property.
They got and education, jobs, property, and
Yes,
education
yeah.
all came out of Reconstruction for them because they benefited from some of the same programs that the freedmen benefited from. Long term is a success for them. It's hard to say, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because who ends up taking over long term in the South? The planter class takes back over. So is that really beneficial to poor white people long term?
Mm-hmm.
But is it really harmful to them? No. Not particularly. Then who else do we have? So we got poor white people.
Rich white people.
Southern planters. Let's call them the Southern planter class. The aristocrats. Was it a success for them in the short term?
No.
Absolutely not. They lost their slaves. They lost their political rights.
Their land.
Some of them lost their land. So short term, not a success for them. Was it a medium term success for them? Not really. But it's not as bad. Long term, did Reconstruction work out for them? Yeah, because they got to pay their slaves now, somewhat, slaves. They don't have slaves. They have to pay their workers now but they turn around and get right back into control. So who else do we have? Northern white people. Northern poor. Let's look at poor Northerners. Was it a success for them? You don't really think about them when you think of Reconstruction, do you?
No, not at all.
I have no clue. I don't really care.
No.
What would be some of the long-term impacts of, or the short-term impacts of Reconstruction on poor Northerners?
Short-term effects, I feel like it kind of hurt them because a lot of the people from down south are trying to move north, so they're taking some of the jobs that some of the poor Northerners could have had.
That would be the effect for them, is they would have to deal with potential job loss. Now, there wasn't mass migration at this time, but they have to worry about their jobs now, because you have another group of people that can come up and compete for the same jobs, and who's getting paid less? The freedmen are going to take less money, so they have more job competition. Also, who's paying for Reconstruction?
The North.
The Northerners.
They don't have to pay for it anymore.
The Northerners. So, was this ever a success for poor Northerners? No, absolutely not. And we forgot two other groups, but I'll go ahead and put them together. Northern politicians, was this a short-term success for them?
Yeah.
If you're a Republican, yeah. Medium-term success for Northern politicians. Yeah, still. And you could add in, if you were a Northern politician and you weren't being successful in the North, what could you do? You could become a carpetbagger yourself. Are you going to be able to take over a Southern seat?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're probably going to vote Republican, and you're going to be able to get the seat. So carpetbaggers were successful. So short-term and medium-term, Northern politicians successful. Long-term, you have the Redeemers coming in, and that impacted Northern politics, or the national politics, and eventually the national. On the national scale, Democrats take back over Congress. They don't take over the presidency, but you have a clear sign that radical Reconstruction is no longer popular in the United States. So they start losing some power there, and they have to reconsolidate. And then carpetbaggers get sent packing. Southern politicians, short-term success. Absolutely not. They lost their political power. Now, there's a group you can include with Southern politicians. Who could you include with Southern politicians? No, not yet. Well, we already kind of talked about them, but who else goes into within like that 1 to 5 year and 5 to about 10 years, who's included?
No.
Well, obviously Confederates are part of the Southern politicians, and they've been disenfranchised. Who else got involved in Southern politics at the beginning of Reconstruction?
KKK.
Wrong group.
White supremacists.
White supremacists.
Nope, that's later.
Neo-Nazis.
Neo-Nazis isn't a thing yet.
It's not. It's not.
Nazis aren't a thing yet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's
Who took some of those empty seats in some of those southern states?
Yeah.
Just say it.
Freedmen!
Oh my
Oh, we
God.
talked about them already.
But there were some freedmen that participated in politics. So some of these southern politicians at this time were black. So for some of them, there was success when you had people like Hiram Revels Rhodes, who was the first black senator. He benefited from Reconstruction, didn't he? But in general, the white Southern politicians, the former Confederates, they don't have political power anymore. So they did not benefit long term or short term. Medium term, what do you start having? A shift in Southern politicians who are successful. Black people start getting pushed out of Southern politics. white people the Democrats start taking over more. The former Confederates start getting their rights back. And by 25 years later, who's running Southern governments?
No,
Democrats.
Democrats.
They take over. So, for Southern politicians, was Reconstruction a success? Did it long-term change Southern politics?
Yeah.
Yes.
Long-term, did Reconstruction change Southern politics?
No.
No. Because you had the Redeemers come in. The Redeemers who then changed the narrative about what the Civil War was about and started making it, we weren't really that bad. Like, bashing us now is worse than bashing slavery. Or is worse than supporting slavery, rather. So, long-term, Southern politicians, Reconstruction didn't really impact them. It sucked in the short term and medium term for Southern politicians, but in the long term, they regain control, and you actually get what is referred to as the Solid South that occurs after the end of Reconstruction. The Solid South is essentially, for approximately 100 years, the South was assured to be going to the Democrats. Very, very rarely did Southern states vote for a Republican until the 1960s, and then it started switching. So, in other words, when you have to measure success of something, whether it's Reconstruction or not, you need to consider the time frame, because there's a such thing as short-term success, medium-term success, and long-term successes. And just because something is successful in the short term doesn't mean it's going to be successful in the long term. Think of the type of success, because you can say, was there short-term constitutional success for African Americans?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Was there a medium-term constitutional success for freedmen and African Americans?
Yes.
Yes. Was there a long-term constitutional success for them? No.
Kind of got through it, but eventually
Well,
they were the way
it just
down.
got ignored. It just got ignored until about the 1960s, when we were like, hey, maybe we should actually start enforcing the 14th and 15th Amendments.
So then, couldn't you say yes because long term's 25 plus years? Couldn't that include?
I would not come that far ahead. And then social success. Was Reconstruction socially successful for these groups of people? Then define what socially successful means, and was it socially successful? Economically successful. I wouldn't really say it was economically successful for anybody but carpetbaggers. Was it politically successful for anybody? In the short term, yeah. In the long term, no. Actually, politically speaking, it wasn't long-term successful for anybody. Unless you want to talk, except for maybe Southern politicians who retake over and get even tighter control of the South. So maybe it's long-term successful for Southern politicians. Even though it sucked for them in the short term. In the long term, they took over the South completely. And then culturally, was it culturally successful for any of these groups?
Yes.
Yes. In some senses, yes, in others, no. So that's what you need to think about whenever you're measuring success. Is there's different types of success, different people who are impacted by different groups that are going to say yes or no on that. And then there's different time periods. So if you're measuring the long-term successes, you need to consider these things to have a full, well-supported, and substantiated claim. So now I present to you. Actually, is this your discussion board question?
How
successful was Reconstruction?
So now your discussion board question, now that we've gone over this and you're keeping these things in mind, how successful was Reconstruction? You don't have to talk about every specific thing.
It says short term and long term. Do you also want medium term or no?
You can kind of throw medium term in there if you want. But so just think about short term, long term successes, who it's successful for, and the types of it. You don't have to write out every single one. Just make sure that you, whatever assessment you come to at the end of it, whatever conclusion you come to at the end, that you've backed it up with evidence and considered these things.
How many sentences?
2 paragraphs. Solid 2 paragraphs.